Well, hello and welcome to this presentation. It's a fairly important one. The topic's title is What Makes You You. Now, many of us live our lives without ever thinking too much about what really makes up who we are. So in this little investigation and presentation, we're going to talk about what makes you you. What are the factors involved in making you just who you are? So as we look here in this picture, we see that there's intense variety in human faces and in human personalities and what we look like. So we want to investigate a little more deeply than the superficial surface appearance of people, and let's see what else we can learn. So what constitutes a human body? On this slide here it says there's a skeletal, circulatory, muscular, nervous, lymph, lungs, skin, digestive organs, sensory system, which is 5 senses, and in that little diagram on the right it points out a few other extra ones. So what we can learn is that the body is quite a complex piece of machinery, if we can say, with a whole variety of systems in place. So that's what makes up our physical body. At the top of that little human anatomy, we see there's the brain. And we're going to talk a little bit about the brain in this presentation. What else could you not talk about except about the brain? Because the brain is where most of the activity takes place in relationship to who we really are. Now, cells are the building blocks of life, and you see there a cutaway in the picture of a cell with all of its multiple bits and pieces that help the cell function. And in the middle, of course, is the DNA, which is the instruction on how to make each one of us. Now, moving to our next slide, we see that the human body is both beautiful and complex. Now, it's a little bit gruesome in some ways maybe, but it does show that there is a complex mixture of systems that we mentioned earlier in the circulatory, the muscular, the nervous systems that make up our whole body. It's a beautiful and complex piece of machinery that makes up our human body. So now we're looking a little deeper into the human body, and we're going to look at irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity. Now on this slide it says complexity is irreducible. So the comment is irreducible complexity is just a fancy phrase I use to mean a single system which is composed of several interacting parts, and where the removal of any one of the parts causes a system to cease functioning. Now the Earth is a total unity of irreducible complexity, and this is something that concerns many people today because of the effects of global warming, the effects of changes in the environment. The complexity of the Earth is being affected, and we see how we struggle on. Now another comment comes from Baylor University Medical Centre. Surgeon Joseph Kuhn says, he wrote that virtually every aspect of human physiology has regulatory elements, feedback loops, and developmental components that require thousands of interacting genes leading to specified protein expression. Thus, the human body represents an irreducible complex system on a cellular and an organ system basis. So that means that we can, as a human body, we can suffer the loss of a limb or some organs and things like that, but at a cellular level, you can't take anything away from a human cell, from any organic matter or organic life, because everything's built on the cell. So the cell itself is where irreducible complexity is, and you can't take anything away from the cell, otherwise the organ from which it is part of will die. So now we're going to move on to the brain. Now, the capital of the body is the brain. So among all the organs of the human body, with all its complexity, the human brain is the capital of the body. The human brain is the body's control center, receiving and sending signals to other organs through the nervous system through secreted or hormones. It is responsible for our thoughts, feelings, memory storage, and general perception of the world. That's from Live Sciences. You find that quote. So yes, the brain is the capital of the human body. And here is what we see. This is where we dwell. And when we ask this question, where do I dwell? This is where we dwell. Now you'll notice there on the right hand side, there's a word here pointing to the frontal lobe. Now it is believed that the frontal lobe is where we make all our decisions, our imagination, our planning, etc., etc. The other different parts of the brain, which are all listed there, are all the more independent mechanical aspects or automatic system of the brain to keep the body functioning. But it's there in the frontal lobe where we make all our decisions and where we imagine and etc., etc. So the brain. It says the brain is bursting with energy. It consists of billions of nerve cells called neurons. Despite its lumpy appearance, the brain is very active and very well organised and in touch with all its employees. That's through those other systems in the brain that the brain is in contact with all its employees. In other words, all the systems in the body are all under the control of the brain. So this is a quick look at the brain in a different cutaway. This is what's known as a sagittal view of the brain. It's a lengthwise cross-section of the brain and gives us a look at some of the internal structures of the brain. So we see, that's our brain. And then how does the brain work? Now let's read here. It says your brain is the hub of your nervous system, as we've just established. It is made up of 100 billion nerve cells, about the same as the number of trees in the Amazon rainforest. Each cell is connected to around 10,000 other cells. So the total number of connections in your brain is the same as the number of leaves in the rainforest, and that's about 1,000 trillion. So this is beyond our comprehension, that there are just so many connections in the human brain and so many cells that are involved in our thought processes. This is what some of the connections look like. The brain has trillions of connections, and that's just a microscopic view of brain neurons with the interconnecting what they call axons and dendrites, and we'll explain a little bit more about them, that connect the nerve cells together. Just a few facts here. It says that the average number of neurons in the human brain is 100 billion. Average number of neurons in an octopus brain is only 300 million. And interesting fact about the rate of neuron growth during development of the fetus while in the womb is 250,000 neurons per minute in the brain, developing in the brain. So that's as the child grows in the womb. So how do we learn? How does the brain function when it comes to learning? It says that the brain is an electrochemical piece of machinery, the electrochemical brain we've titled here. The activity in brain neurons is electrochemical. When we initiate a thought or an action, the brain neuron fires an electrical current called an action potential along one of the neurons, many axons, to the synapse, where the physical connection between brains takes place, or brain neurons takes place. Here the electrical signal is converted into a chemical action, which is the release of neurotransmitters. Now there are two things, axons and dendrites, and we're going to see a little bit more about that, to connect the cells together. It says neurotransmitters, which we just mentioned in that last slide. Neurotransmitters are chemical substances that reside in the axon terminals. In other words, at the end of an axon, where it's coming to almost touch another brain neuron, or the dendrite from another brain neuron. They are called axon terminals. So the neurotransmitters are chemicals in that terminal. They communicate to other neurons by binding to receptors on the neighbouring neurons. As we repeat any action in the axon dendrite connection, the neurotransmitter chemical sacs, they're called synaptic vesicle, in the axon terminal increase in quantity. The pathway becomes stronger, which is called brain growth or memory. So new axon dendrite pathways form every moment of every day. So we're forming new pathways all the time, which means that the brain is always in a state of growth and development. It's very sad that some people don't take advantage of the potential that they have in their brain to learn. So we'll have a picture now of the connections between axons and dendrites. As you can see there, the axons at a connection point of the synapse, the axons can be the blue on the right-hand side there, the right-hand cell. The blue is the axon, and the ones reaching out from the neuron are the dendrites. And so the connection is made. And now what happens now is that this is the actual synapse, the point where the two connect. Interestingly, it says brain cells never touch each other. They communicate with each other by chemical marriage, referred to as synapse, right? And remember we talked about neurotransmitters. The more synaptic connections you have, the healthier your brain may be. This is referred to as synaptic density, that helps to build your brain reserve over the course of your lifetime. So you see, if you're always studying and learning, you build up synaptic density. And this is, of course, is a positive, and means that you've got a better chance of holding things together as you age. So in that little diagram there, it shows that the neurotransmitters, the little red dots in the middle, are disgorged from one vesicle, the vesicles in the axon, and they're received by receptors on the dendrite. And so that's how our brain cells talk to each other and make those connections. Now just here, I want to raise another important point about the synaptic connection. As we repeat an action, those vesicles that are in the end of the axons connecting to the dendrites, those vesicles grow in number, carrying the chemicals that will make the transition of the action. The more we repeat an action, the more vesicles are created and the stronger the pathway. Now, this is how we learn to remember something. The more often we do it, repetition, and the vesicle increases in number, the pathway becomes stronger, and eventually it works that just a slight electrical charge down that particular pathway in your mind triggers the same response. And so the pathway becomes automatic. And that's the important point about the synaptic connections. They grow. And as they grow and strengthen, then that becomes our memory, our automatic actions and pathways that are formed in our minds. This is important information to also understand. Repetition is how we learn any particular thing. So thinking makes it so, as the expression goes. So neurons are the brain cells that connect and produce the emotions, motion, and thoughts on a daily basis, as we've seen in that diagram. So brain potential is unlimited. Research indicates that the human brain has the potential to develop new brain cells called neurogenesis in the hippocampus, located in the temporal lobe. The hippocampus is important for memory and new learning and spatial processing. It is thought that an enriched environment including novel and complex stimuli on a daily basis, promotes brain health. That's why we say, like the old expression, if you don't use it, you lose it. So we need to exercise our brain as much as we do our bodies. And so that can be through reading, studying, learning, talking, imagining, writing, storytelling, where we develop new, through the process of neurogenesis, we develop new cells in the brain. So, as I said before, use it or lose it. If the cells are unused, they atrophy and are rededicated to other senses. Underused cells or neurons, like synapses, are inactivated by pruning process. So gradually the brain deletes or prunes away the pathways that are not being used, and they're rededicated to other pathways. That's why we can forget things and lose our memory of things, because these things can be lost. So it's important that we try to increase our brain's capacity to learn. So we're still talking on the points of what we're talking about here. We're talking about what makes you you. So we're studying some of the physical aspects, but let's look a little bit now at some of the factors that determine just who you are. So in this little slide it says, so what are the factors that determine who you are? Now we can start out with our genetic heritage, because you never know what your genes are carrying from how many generations back. The family that we are born into, the emotional relationships that we have, the parental relationships, even brother and sisterly or sibling relationships, the cultural influences, the economic circumstances of the family, the spiritual environment of the family, because religion probably plays a big part in many family lives, and so it can also be one of the influencing factors. Personal choices we make. So at the end of it, it's quite often we still have the power to choose. And this is the most important thing that we need to understand. We do have the power of choice. As I said, we say we can't choose our relatives, but we can choose our friends. So sometimes we can't choose our family environment, our growing up, or any of those things. We can't change them. So we have to deal with them. And that can be by personal choices, whether we accede to what we're being told or whether we don't. So one of the other things that we do as humans quite often is self-talk. So it says, who are you telling yourself you are? Self-talk can have a really great impact on your self-esteem and confidence. There is positive and negative self-talk, and they both have an impact on how you feel. There are a few ways you can develop better self-talk, including just listening to what you're saying to yourself each day. It's worth practicing self-talk, as feeling good about yourself is worth the effort. So there's one important thing about self-talk. We can talk ourselves down, make ourselves feel bad. Oh, I'm no good, I'm stupid, I'm whatever. Or we can talk more positively about ourselves. We have enormous potential. Remember, that brain has the capacity to create through neurogenesis, new brain cells, and we can start a new way of thinking or understanding things and even behaving. So self-talk is something that we should practice, but not negative, positive. Self-talk again says here, self-talk is basically your inner voice, the voice in your mind, which says things that you don't necessarily say out loud. Often self-talk happens without you even realizing it, and can be a subtle running commentary going on in the background of your mind. But what you say in your mind can determine a lot of how you feel about who you are. So a little bit more on self-talk, and you can identify with that. What you say in your mind can determine a lot about how you feel, who you are. Remember, our topic is what makes you you. So we're looking at what are the factors that influence who you really are. Now look, one of the things that influences a lot of us, and probably is some of the most negative, is forms of childhood abuse. So here we have a list some of the forms of childhood abuse. I mean, some people might have been brought up in happy families with love and everything they ever needed, but there are a lot that didn't have that blessing and suffered these things. It says here, this is a list of some of the things that can be detrimental to our self-image and how we feel about ourselves. Name calling, belittling, swearing, insulting, indirect criticism, rejecting or threatening abandonment. That's where, if you don't do what you're doing, it'll leave you on the side of the road. And, things like this. Threatening bodily harm. Now remember that threatening to a child at 2 or 3 is real. They don't know that you're only using it as a manipulative tool, but they'll work it out later, sooner or later, that you're not serious and can lead to all sorts of other complications. Then the scapegoating and blaming, using sarcasm. Sarcasm, as they say, is the lowest form of wit, lowest form of humour, but it can hurt people significantly. Berating a spouse in front of a child, like a husband comes home from work and argues with a wife, why isn't dinner ready, whatever. They argue about the bills, about why did she buy that, told her not to spend the money. All these sorts of things have an impact on children. So indoctrination into attitudes towards others, saying, oh, those people down the road, they're absolutely hopeless people, they are rubbish people, they're Westies, they're bad, or whatever. So, you're indoctrinating attitudes, and this happens a lot in some religious connotations, where, I'm sorry to say it, that in one particular faith they are taught to look upon other people as infidels, and in another faith they look upon people as Gentiles. And I'm not going to say the names, but this is bad. This is not what you should do. Every person has a right to be treated equally and not to be have criticism directed towards them because other children have been fed with wrong attitudes. So imposing your secular or spiritual ideals into a child. So there's, again, that's that link with religion that can be a problem, forcing it on spiritual ideals on children who don't have a chance to make a choice. That frontal lobe of the brain is where you make your choice. And I believe that the free will is something that is a gift to every one of us to make our own choice. And it's never and should never, ever be overridden. Okay, so the childhood trap is bad parents. Children whose parents convey, I don't like you, however, have no divorce option. You might have heard recently that some children have tried to divorce their parents and been successful. They just don't want anything to do with them because of their attitude towards them and the I don't like you message that they get. These children are stuck with parents whose attitude conveys that they are unlovable. How would a child feel feeling that they're unlovable? That's a really damaging thing to plant in a child's mind. Children depend on parental mirroring, that is, feedback from others, to develop a self-image of who they are. So they depend on their parents. And so if your parent's telling you, oh, you're stupid, you're an idiot, how is that going to work? It's going to be damaging to the self-image of that child. So to develop the self-image of just who they are, this is the thing that we need to preserve. Verbally abusive parents convey that the child is bad, stupid, or worse. So here we have a core problem in society today. We have a lot of people who are abusive to their children and never realise the long-term damage that they will do to their child, and they may never achieve the potential that they have throughout their lifetime because of what their parents have done to them. So what if the talk you hear is nothing but critical? So here we have another spin on, or another few words on this topic. The effects of verbal abuse on children, women and men, follow the same general principles. Verbal abuse causes people to feel fear. However, victims may deny or not recognise their anxiety and feelings of wanting to get away as fear of the abuser. So they may have anxiety and wanting to get away. You know, how many children have anxiety? How many people have anxiety? And it's through fear of an abuser. Possibly this is the cause. This is where we need to do a little bit of thinking about what we're doing and how we're treating others. When the victim feels kindness or love from the abuser, they know that it is short-lived and the abuse will reoccur, because that's the track record they've seen. Victims live in a state of hyper-awareness, watching for clues of impending abuse. When victims can't trust the smile of someone they love, that is a very big deal. So when a little child can't trust the smile of mummy and daddy towards them until they're fearful that the next thing they're going to get is a load of abuse because they haven't done something, then that's a big deal. And that's very, very damaging in the long term. So the power of the mind can be used for good or for bad. It's the battle of the mind is the war zone. Here we need to remember that love is what needs to be pursued. Love has to overcome all of these abusive, bad tendencies, self-image problems that people have, but genuine love. The Bible says there's another problem that humans suffer from, and it's about pride. It says others are proud. Galatians 6:3 says, "For if a man think himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself." Some people are overinflated with the opinion of themselves and let everybody know that they think they are better than everybody else. And this is bad. He's only deceiving himself, because no one is any better than anybody else. We all came into this world the same way, and we'll all go out of it the same way. So what are we going to leave behind? The book of Romans also talks about another aspect. Who do you think you are? Remember what I was saying about how you can perceive who you are, the self-image? For it says here in Romans 12:3, "For I say, through the grace given unto me, to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God hath dealt to every man the measure of faith." This is an important thing, that we need a measure of faith. We need it because God is giving it. He's willing to give it. And we have to open our hearts to that. But we are not to think ourselves more highly than we ought to think about ourselves. That pride is one of the greatest problems in the human psyche, in the human mind. And selfishness, self, is one of the greatest enemies of peace and love in human relationships. So that's something for us to pursue, isn't it? Seek peace and love with others, and don't think too highly of yourself. You know, the humble person will have more friends than the person who is proud. The humble person who puts others before himself will be more respected and more loved and have more friends and more people concerned about them than the person who is too proud and wants to exalt himself above others. So these principles are quite simple. So now, what are you thinking? What are you thinking about yourself? It says here, "For as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." So how do you think about yourself? So here we have to really contemplate thoughts about just who we are. The important thing is that each one of us has a brain. We all know that. Each one of us resides in that brain, as I said, in the temporal lobe. And that's what we call the spirit of a man, the personality, the characteristic of each person. Now here it says, the spirit of a man, on the right-hand side, the spirit of a man is the personality, the characteristics, the intellect, and the memories of a man. The spirit of a man dwells upon the neurons of the brain. The brain is the citadel of the body. The spirit of a man that inhabits a brain plus the body is what constitutes a person, or we could say a soul. Man has autonomy over the body. We have autonomy over the body. We can either treat it well or treat it bad. If we do abuse our bodies with alcohol and drugs and cigarettes and that, we'll suffer. So we have to contemplate, therefore, what man knoweth the things of a man, save the spirit of a man which is in him. So you can only know as much as you can know about yourself. You can't really know another person. You can't see who they are or what they are. But this is important. We need to understand that the spirit of a man is something that dwells in us. It's not our mind. It's not our body. It is the spirit of us that dwells in the body, on the brain. So what is life and who are you? The body, it says on the left, is the physical body, the life force. These two together constitute the soul, as I mentioned. God formed man out of the dust of the earth and breathed through his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. The scripture finished. So the spirit of a man is the body, the brain, the personality formed, only has existence in the physical brain and depends entirely on life in the body. The body has to be alive for the spirit to be alive in the body. So relationship between the mind and the body is very close. It's interwoven in a very, very special way. But through all the systems that we looked at earlier, this is how the body is together. So what we need to know. We need to know our reason for existence. We need to know and have intelligent understanding of ourselves. We need to acknowledge that we don't know everything about ourselves. We need to open our mind to new ideas and concepts. We need to let wisdom from outside of world sources into our minds. We need to know that we are unique and special. We need to know that we are loved and appreciated. I hope that this talk has helped you learn a little bit more about your thinking, about who you are, and that you might have some questions, more questions that come to mind. You may have some thoughts, and you can contact me on the contact details I'll leave on the end of this video. So thank you for watching. I hope it's something beneficial to you and whoever is watching today. Thank you for being with me.